There is something about your presence that unsettles people, and it's not because you are loud, aggressive, or demanding. It's because you are honest in a way that most people have never allowed themselves to be. You don't just hear words, you feel what lives underneath them. You don't just see behavior, you sense the pain driving it. And without trying, without even speaking, you hold up a mirror that others cannot look away from. Most people spend their lives learning how to survive their own emotions, not understand them. They build identities around what was acceptable, what was safe, what kept them from being rejected or abandoned. They bury grief under productivity, anger under politeness, fear under control. And over time, they forget that any of it was buried at all. It becomes who they think they are. It becomes normal. Then you walk into their life, and suddenly, something shifts, because your energy does not agree with what is false. Not in a confrontational way, but in a quiet, undeniable way. You listen deeper than they are used to. You respond with a level of presence that makes surface-level interactions feel empty. You ask questions that don't let them hide behind rehearsed answers. And even when you say nothing, your awareness reaches places they've spent years avoiding. This is where the discomfort begins, not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are revealing something they are not ready to face. Your light doesn't attack, it illuminates. And illumination, for someone living in suppression, can feel like exposure. It can feel invasive, it can feel threatening. You might notice how some people are drawn to you at first. They feel seen in a way that is rare. They feel understood without having to explain themselves. There is a sense of relief in your presence, like they can finally breathe. But that relief does not always last, because being seen also means being known. And being known means their hidden truths are no longer fully hidden. What they once found comforting in you can slowly become the very thing they resent. They may not say it directly. In fact, most of the time, they won't even understand it themselves. But you will feel it, the subtle shift in tone, the passive resistance, the way their openness turns into defensiveness, the way your care is met with distance, the way your presence, once welcomed, becomes something they push against. And you will question yourself. You will wonder if you said too much, felt too deeply, gave too intensely. You will try to shrink the very part of you that was never the problem. You will consider dimming your light just to restore the connection. But what you're actually witnessing is not rejection of you. It is rejection of what you awaken in them. Because when someone has spent years suppressing parts of themselves, your authenticity becomes a disruption. It challenges the emotional agreements they've made with themselves. It threatens the structures they've built to stay safe. And instead of turning inward to face what's been buried, many will turn outward and unconsciously blame the one who revealed it. That's where resentment is born. Not from your actions, but from their resistance. They may accuse you of being too intense, too sensitive, too much. They may minimize your insight or dismiss your perspective. They may create distance without explanation or find subtle ways to undermine your presence. And it will feel confusing because you never intended to cause harm. You only showed up as you are. But that is precisely what made it difficult for them, because authenticity is not always comforting, it is confronting. It removes the illusion that everything is fine. It dissolves the stories people tell themselves to avoid their own pain. And for someone who is not ready to face that pain, your presence becomes a reminder of everything they've been trying to escape. You become the mirror they didn't ask for, and mirrors are not always loved. This is the paradox of being an empath. Your greatest gift, your ability to see, feel, and understand, can also be the very thing that creates distance. Not because it is wrong, but because it is rare. And what is rare often disrupts what is familiar. You don't operate on the same emotional level as most people. You don't engage in conversations just to pass time. You don't connect through masks or superficial roles. You connect through truth, through depth, through presence. And that level of connection requires a willingness that not everyone has developed. So when you offer it freely, it can overwhelm those who are still protecting themselves from their own inner world. They may admire you, but at the same time feel inadequate around you. They may appreciate your kindness, but feel exposed by your clarity. They may be drawn to your light, but resent the way it reveals their shadows. And instead of integrating that experience, they push against it. This is not something you can fix, because it was never something you caused. You are not responsible for how others respond to their own reflection. You are not meant to carry the discomfort that arises. when someone is faced with their truth. Your role is not to dim your awareness to make others feel comfortable in their avoidance. Your role is to remain grounded in who you are, even when it challenges the emotional patterns around you. That doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. It means understanding that your presence will not always be received the way you intend. It means recognizing that your depth will not always be matched. It means accepting that some people will choose distance over growth, resistance over reflection, resentment over responsibility. And that choice is theirs, not yours. Because your light is not the problem. Your light is simply revealing what has been hidden for too long. And for those who are ready, it becomes a doorway. But for those who are not, it feels like a threat. There is a strange comfort in what hurts us when it is familiar. It doesn't feel good, but it feels known. And what is known feels controllable, even when it is slowly breaking us. People will return to the same emotional patterns, the same types of relationships, the same cycles of disappointment, not because they enjoy suffering, but because their nervous system has learned to recognize that suffering is home. You step into their life with something different. You bring presence, not performance, not manipulation, not emotional games, but something real. You listen without an agenda. You respond without trying to dominate. You create space where truth can exist without punishment. And at first it feels like relief to them, like stepping into fresh air after being trapped in a closed room. But fresh air can also feel unfamiliar to someone who has only known suffocation. Because genuine presence requires something that familiar pain never does. It requires vulnerability. It asks a person to feel without numbing, to express without hiding, to confront what they've been running from. And for someone who has built their identity around avoiding that discomfort, your presence becomes destabilizing. They don't know how to exist in something healthy. They don't know how to trust something that doesn't come with tension, unpredictability, or emotional chaos. They've learned that love comes with conditions, with withdrawal, with inconsistency. They've learned to read between the lines, to anticipate rejection, to brace themselves for disappointment. And when those patterns are not present, they don't feel safe. They feel lost. Because safety, for them, has never been about peace. It has been about predictability. And pain, when it is predictable, becomes easier to manage than peace that is unfamiliar. So when you offer calm, they search for conflict. When you offer honesty, they look for hidden meaning. When you show consistency, they wait for the moment it will disappear. Not because you've given them a reason to doubt, but because their past has trained them to expect it. Your presence doesn't align with their internal map of relationships. And instead of updating that map, many people will try to force you into it. They may test you, provoke you, withdraw from you, or create distance without explanation. They may recreate the very dynamics they claim to want to escape, because those dynamics are the only ones they understand. It's not conscious most of the time. It's a pattern running beneath awareness, a learned response shaped by years of emotional conditioning. You will feel the confusion of giving something real and watching it be rejected. You will feel the weight of offering peace and being met with resistance. You will question why something so genuine feels so difficult for the other person to receive. But the truth is, genuine presence doesn't just offer connection. It disrupts survival strategies. And survival strategies don't disappear easily. They are built over years, sometimes decades, as a way to cope with pain that once felt unbearable. They are reinforced through repetition, through relationships that confirm the same emotional story again and again. And even when those strategies are no longer serving the person, they still feel necessary. Because letting go of them means stepping into the unknown. And the unknown for many feels more dangerous than the pain they already know. So they return to what is familiar, even if it hurts, even if it limits them, even if it costs them something real. They may leave your presence and gravitate toward relationships that recreate their old wounds. They may choose people who are unavailable, inconsistent, or emotionally closed. They may find themselves in cycles that mirror their past, because those cycles don't require them to change. And change is what your presence asks of them, not through force, but through contrast. You show them what it feels like to be seen without judgment, to be heard without dismissal, to be valued without condition. And that experience creates a tension between who they have been and who they could become. It exposes the gap between their past and a different possibility. And that gap can feel overwhelming, because stepping into something healthier means grieving what they've accepted for so long. It means acknowledging the pain they've normalized. It means taking responsibility for patterns they've repeated, and not everyone is ready for that level of awareness. So, instead of stepping forward, they step back. Instead of leaning into presence, they retreat into familiarity. Instead of choosing growth, they choose what they already know how to survive. And you, standing in your authenticity, become a reminder of the path they are not taking. That reminder can turn into resistance, not because you are lacking, but because you are offering something they cannot yet hold. You cannot compete with someone's attachment to their own patterns. You cannot love someone out of a cycle they are not ready to leave. You cannot make genuine presence feel safe to a person who has only learned to feel safe in chaos, and trying to do so will only drain you, because you will begin to question your own way of being. You will wonder if you need to adjust, to adapt, to meet them where they are in a way that compromises who you are. You will feel the pull to make yourself more familiar, more predictable in the ways they understand, even if it means stepping away from your truth. But that is where the real loss happens, not in them choosing what is familiar, but in you abandoning what is real. Because your presence is not meant to be reshaped to fit someone else's comfort zone. It is meant to remain steady, even when it is not fully received. Some people will meet you there, some people will recognize the difference and choose to grow into it. But others will turn away, not because your presence lacks value, but because it asks for a level of honesty they are not ready to give themselves. And that is a boundary you cannot cross for them. Familiar pain will always have a pull. It will always whisper that it is easier, safer, more manageable. But your presence introduces something else entirely, something that cannot be controlled through old patterns, something that cannot survive inside emotional avoidance, something that requires a person to step out of who they've been in order to become who they could be. And that step is one they have to choose on their own. You learned early that your value lived in how much you could give, not in who you were, not in what you felt, but in how deeply you could understand others, how quickly you could respond to their needs, how quietly you could set yourself aside to make space for someone else. And over time, that became your language of connection. You didn't just offer kindness, you offered access to yourself without limits. At first it feels like love. It feels like you are doing the right thing, being the safe place, the one who listens, the one who holds, the one who stays when others leave. You become the emotional anchor in people's lives, the one they turn to in chaos, the one they trust with their pain, the one who absorbs what they cannot carry. But something subtle begins to shift. Because when giving has no boundary, it stops being a conscious act and becomes an unconscious pattern. You stop choosing when to give, and you start feeling obligated to give. You stop noticing your own limits, and you start ignoring them. You stop asking what you need because you've trained yourself to believe that your role is to provide, not to receive. And people feel that, not always consciously, but they sense the openness, the availability, the absence of resistance. And that kind of energy does not just attract those who are capable of mutual connection. It also attracts those who are looking for somewhere to place what they don't want to carry. Misalignment begins quietly. It doesn't start with obvious imbalance. It starts with small moments where you give a little more than you should, where you say yes when something inside you is asking for space, where you extend understanding without checking whether it is being respected. And because you are used to overriding your own signals, you don't stop it early, you adjust instead. You tell yourself they're going through something, that they don't mean it, that if you just hold on a little longer, things will even out. You believe that your consistency will inspire theirs, that your care will teach them how to care, that your patience will eventually be met with presence. But what you are actually doing is teaching them how to relate to you. And when there are no boundaries, the lesson becomes clear. You will remain, no matter the cost. So they take more. Not always out of cruelty, but out of alignment with what you've allowed. They lean into your understanding without offering their own. They rely on your emotional availability without developing theirs. They come to you when they need something, but disappear when you do. And slowly, the connection begins to revolve around what you provide, not who you are. This is where the fracture deepens. Because giving without boundaries doesn't just create imbalance, it creates invisibility. You are present, but not seen. You are valued, but not understood. You are needed, but not truly known. And the more you give, the more you reinforce that dynamic, until something inside you starts to resist. It may show up as exhaustion, as frustration, as a quiet sense of being drained in a connection that once felt meaningful. You may notice the weight of always being the one who holds space, the one who initiates, the one who maintains. You may feel the absence of reciprocity, even if it's never been explicitly promised. And with that awareness comes confusion, because you gave willingly. You offered your presence without being asked. You stepped into that role because it felt natural, because it felt right. So it becomes difficult to understand why it now feels wrong. But the truth is, giving without boundaries is not sustainable. Not because giving is flawed, but because it requires structure to remain healthy. It requires clarity about where you end and another person begins. It requires the ability to say no without guilt, to step back without fear, to recognize when your energy is being used in a way that disconnects you from yourself. Without that, your giving becomes a form of self-abandonment. And self-abandonment always leads to misalignment, because the relationships you build from that place are not rooted in mutual truth. They are rooted in adaptation, in overextension, in the quiet belief that you must earn your place by how much you can offer. And people respond to that belief. They may appreciate you, they may even care about you, but they will meet you at the level you present. If you present yourself as someone who gives without limit, they will not instinctively create limits for you. If you show that your needs are secondary, they will not naturally prioritize them. Not because you don't deserve it, but because the dynamic was never built to hold it. So when you begin to feel the imbalance, when you start to recognize the cost, it can feel like something has been taken from you, like you've been giving into something that was never truly equal. And that realization can bring pain, not just because of the other person, but because of what you allowed. But this is where clarity begins, because boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about reconnecting with yourself. They are about recognizing that your presence has value beyond what you provide. They are about understanding that giving should come from a place of fullness, not depletion. And when you begin to shift that, everything changes. The people who are aligned with your lack of boundaries may resist it. They may question it, challenge it, or pull away from it. Not because you've done something wrong, but because the dynamic they were comfortable with is no longer available. And that resistance will test you. It will tempt you to return to what is familiar, to soften your limits, to go back to giving in the way that once kept the connection intact. But if that connection required you to disappear within it, then maintaining it at that cost is not connection. It is sacrifice without reciprocity. And you are not meant to exist in that space, because your ability to give is not meant to be a doorway for others to take without awareness. It is meant to be an expression of who you are, guided by presence, grounded in self-respect, and shaped by the understanding that real connection does not require you to lose yourself to keep it alive. When boundaries enter, alignment becomes visible. Those who can meet you there will adjust, will grow, will begin to engage with you in a way that reflects mutual awareness. And those who cannot will reveal themselves through their resistance. And that revelation, as uncomfortable as it may be, is not a loss. It is the removal of what was never truly aligned to begin with. There is a quiet power in being real that most people underestimate until they stand in front of it. You don't announce it, you don't force it, you don't try to prove anything, yet your authenticity carries a weight that unsettles anything built on pretense. It doesn't attack, it doesn't argue, it simply exists, and in that existence it exposes what is not real. Most people are not walking through life as who they truly are. They are walking as who they had to become. They learned early which parts of themselves were acceptable and which parts needed to be hidden. They learned how to adjust their voice, their emotions, their truth to fit into environments that did not make space for them. And over time, that adaptation became identity. It becomes the mask they no longer realize they are wearing. And that mask is not always obvious. It can look like confidence, like control, like success, like emotional strength. It can look like someone who has everything together, someone who knows exactly who they are. But underneath that image, there is often a quiet tension, the effort it takes to maintain something that is not fully aligned. Then you enter their space without a mask. You don't perform who you are. You don't adjust your truth to be more acceptable. You don't hide your depth to make others comfortable. You exist in a way that is integrated, where what you feel and what you show are not in conflict. And that kind of presence is rare, because authenticity is not just honesty, it is coherence. It is the absence of contradiction between your inner world and your outer expression. It is the willingness to be seen without editing yourself to fit expectations. And when someone who has spent their life managing an image comes into contact with that, it creates a rupture in their perception, because your presence raises a question they cannot easily ignore. If you can exist without a mask, what does that say about the mask they are wearing? And that question is not comfortable. It challenges the identity they've built, the one that has protected them, the one that has allowed them to navigate relationships and environments without being fully exposed. It brings attention to the parts of themselves they've disconnected from, the emotions they've suppressed, the truths they've avoided. And instead of turning inward to explore that discomfort, many will turn outward and react to you. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done something real. They may begin to question your intentions, to interpret your authenticity as arrogance, as intensity, as something excessive. They may project onto you qualities that don't belong to you, because it is easier to redefine your presence than to redefine themselves. You will feel the shift, the way admiration turns into subtle resistance, the way openness becomes guardedness, the way your presence, once welcomed, becomes something they push against, and it will feel confusing because nothing about you has changed, but something in them has been activated, because authenticity removes the comfort of illusion. It does not allow people to fully hide behind who they pretend to be. It disrupts the agreements they've made with themselves about what is true. It reveals the gap between who they are and who they present. And that gap can feel threatening when it has been ignored for too long. You become a living contrast, not by trying to be different, but by refusing to be disconnected from yourself. And that contrast can create pressure, because when someone sees a possibility they are not living, it forces a choice. They can either move toward that possibility, which requires change, vulnerability, and honesty, or they can resist it and protect the identity they've built. Many will choose protection, because letting go of a false identity is not a small act. It is not just about changing behavior, it is about dismantling a structure that has held their sense of self together. It is about facing the fear of being rejected for who they truly are. It is about stepping into uncertainty without the safety of the roles they've relied on. And that is not easy, so instead they may try to pull you into their framework. They may expect you to soften your truth, to dilute your presence, to become more like what they are comfortable with. They may reward you when you adjust and withdraw when you don't. They may create subtle pressure for you to align with the version of reality that keeps their identity intact. And this is where many lose themselves, because the desire to maintain connection can be strong. The instinct to belong can override the awareness of misalignment, and you may find yourself considering it, toning down your authenticity, filtering your expression, becoming more acceptable at the cost of being real. But every time you do that, you feel it. The quiet disconnection from yourself, the subtle tension of not fully being who you are, the awareness that something true has been compromised, and that awareness is not something you can ignore forever. Because authenticity, once realized, cannot be completely suppressed again. You may try to adjust, to fit, to maintain relationships that require you to shrink, but it will never feel the same. There will always be a part of you that knows what it feels like to be fully aligned, fully expressed, fully present, and that knowing changes everything. It makes it harder to tolerate spaces where you have to pretend. It makes it harder to engage in dynamics that rely on illusion. It makes it harder to accept connections that are built on anything less than truth. And as you hold that line, the people around you reveal themselves. Those who are ready will lean in, not because your authenticity is easy, but because it is real. They will feel the challenge and choose growth. They will recognize the discomfort and stay present within it. They will allow your presence to inspire something deeper in themselves. But those who are not ready will resist. They will misinterpret, deflect, withdraw, or attempt to reshape you into something that fits their comfort. Not because you are wrong, but because you are unfiltered in a world that often survives through filtering. And that resistance is not your responsibility to resolve, because your authenticity is not an attack. It is an invitation to live without the weight of false identities, an invitation to exist without the constant effort of maintaining an image, an invitation to reconnect with what is real beneath everything that has been learned, adapted, and performed. Some will accept that invitation, and some will reject it, but your role is not to change your truth to make that decision easier for them. Your role is to remain in alignment with who you are, even when it challenges what others have chosen to be.